Welcome back. Here are some tough questions, or are they? Was Rongo Weteri guilty of nepotism at Te Wānanga or Aotearoa? Has Winston Peters accepted the baubles of office? Did David Benson Pope stuff a tennis ball into a student's mouth? And when is a lie not really a lie? Well, we haven't got the answers for any of those questions, although plenty of public figures have tried to answer the fourth one. The one thing we do know is that we all tell lies at some stage, ranging from fibs, you look lovely in that dress, to big fat whoppers. Why? Richard Langston is both a journalist and a poet, which makes him really an expert at the stuff. So we asked him to find out.
The boy! The boy!
Isaac is 2, as cute as a button, and... So when do you reckon we tell our first lie?
Around about the same time we start talking. So as soon as what we say is recognisable to others, I'm pretty sure that we're starting to tell lies.
Gosh, it's a bit sad, isn't it, that we start so early?
Yeah, but again, it's part of the grease that makes life go round. If you have a child who doesn't learn to lie, then I'm afraid that that child is going to be disadvantaged relative to everyone else in the environment.
We call Isaac's deceptions fibs, softening the fact someone of such tender years has already joined the everyday human parade of duplicity.
We lie pretty much all the time. In fact, the research says that when researchers identify people who don't appear to be lying, that they are so much in the minority that they must be lying about it.
We tell little white lies and big black lies. Why? Well, the most powerful are prepared to speak with a forked tongue to millions to save their butts.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Liar, liar, liar.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky.
Liar, 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 liar.
It's founded on the belief that they're not going to be found out. Because politics is just like any type of industry. Your reputation is the thing that sells your product. And as long as you have a good reputation, then people will continue to believe you. The problem is that when you get found out, that product becomes sullied.
We lie to get ahead. This Auckland woman lied about who she was and lied again to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars. Canadian John Davey lied about how smart he was, faking a glowing resume to land a prestigious job as the head of Māori television.
Direct television experience, no, but the mechanics of how it works, yes.
Once we get a reputation for lying, people aren't going to trust us anymore, and we have to move on. We have to find another society or a group that will accept us again. And this is what happens in the case of con artists or psychopaths.
Yes, the worst of us can kill our own wife and child and then deny it. Australian John Sharp, the latest to front up to the cameras and try and act his way out of trouble.
I haven't harmed my wife or my daughter. I haven't harmed either of them.
Important for you to put that on the record, and you've done so.
On the record, most definitely on the record.
If you're in a situation like that, where it's expected that if you are guilty, you are telling a lie, the most successful lies are the ones that are best thought out. Okay, so they don't diverge. They diverge as little as possible from the truth, and you have practiced them, and you've practiced and practiced and practiced.
Many of us are such sophisticated liars that lie detector machines are not regarded as particularly reliable at catching us out. They're pretty crude. They only measure changes in blood pressure and our heart rate. But scientists are developing better ways to catch out lies, including a helmet, which fits on the head and measures electrical changes in the brain.
I didn't lie. I omitted to tell the whole truth.
Winston! And there are those so gifted in the art of sophistry, their plainly stated truths about declining the baubles of office might easily be misconstrued by lesser minds.
There are some occupations which are better than others. Unfortunately, for example, politicians, used car salesmen, anyone who's trying to sell anything, tend to receive lower trust ratings from the general public. And I think part of the reason for that is it's expected that it's part of their job to lie.
So help me God.
I have suffered some shock.
To be a good liar, you first have to learn to lie to yourself, and then you can fool others. And we're surprisingly easy to fool.
We tend to be pretty bad. We're actually a lot worse at detecting lying than we like to think we are. But there is a little bit of evidence that some occupational groups may be better than others. So, for example, Secret Servicemen in the US turned out to be the best at detecting lies. They were better than your average law enforcement officer. And in fact, sort of general law enforcement, people who haven't actually been trained in interrogation and things like that, are just as bad as the general public at detecting lying. So about chance, 50%.
Marc Wilson, psychologist, ending that report from Richard Langston. So it's hard to tell when someone who's good at lying is lying, except if you're Steve Van Aperen, an Australian described as the human polygraph. So good is he at the business of lie detecting that he's used by Victorian police in homicide cases. Yes, that's serious. Steve Van Aperen is the managing director of Australian Polygraph Services. Although based in Australia, they have conducted polygraphs on New Zealanders, and they can be found online at polygraph.com.au. Steve Van Aperen joins us live from Melbourne now. Steve, I don't know, could you hear that story as it was coming down the line to you in Melbourne?
Yes, I could.
Well, I think you might want the right of reply to Richard's assertion that polygraphs are what, crude things. You've said previously you can beat the test but not necessarily the tester. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, it's the other way around. People beat the examiner. A polygraph just records physiological changes at a given point in time. So when we consciously decide that we're going to lie, we become fearful of being caught in that lie. And what happens is our brain sends messages to our autonomic nervous system. So we see a number of changes. We see changes in blood pressure, changes in emotional sweating and respiration. All a polygraph does is records those changes.
OK, but there are some people who are, what, able to alter their physiology, able to rehearse and so that they can not display those signs?
To a certain degree, people do control their respiration, but there's always telltale signs, or what I call seepage. I was fortunate enough to train with the FBI in the States, and they teach their investigators how to look for telltale signs. And no matter how well rehearsed you are, there's often going to be contradiction or conflict between what a person is in fact saying and what a person is doing. I can lie to you using words, but sometimes my body language is much more overt, and we need to look for those cues or those facts.
OK, so if you're rudimentary at the business of lying, you can spot it instantly, can you?
Yeah, what I do is I benchmark a person's behaviour when I meet them, and I look at how they respond to questions. I also look how cognitively they recall information. So if I was to ask you a question, what was your very first job, and you look up to the left and say it was news reading in 1972, neurologically, I know that you're using that part of the brain to recall information. So when you're going to start fabricating or embellishing, usually we use the other parts of our brain. And research has shown through MRI scans that we use a different part. We actually use 3 parts of our brain to fabricate or embellish. And that's why it's so difficult for the average person to lie.
OK, Steve, are there some mental disorders, for example, or criminal predilections which make people better at being persuasive liars? Psychopaths, pedophiles, those kind of people?
Yeah, they don't necessarily make them better liars. Typically what happens is if I'm going to lie, I have to convince you that what I'm saying is in fact correct or true. So I want to buy believability or credibility, and often what we don't listen for, we listen to the content of what people are saying, but we don't look at the method in which it's paralinguistically delivered. So that's when people are deceptive, we see changes in response latency, for example, many more ums and ahs. They've got to think, what have I said previously that could contradict me now? Neurologically, a truthful person doesn't go through that rational process. When a person is telling the truth and recalling information, often they've lived that part. So they're much more adept at supplying and providing more detail, feelings, thoughts, emotions, colours, memories are much more vivid. Whereas for every lie a person invents, they have to invent 2 or 3. And secondly, they've got to think, what have I said previously that could contradict me now? Now, getting back to your question, without doubt, my belief is pedophiles make very good liars because they're very good at manipulating not just their victims, but also their treatment providers. So you can rehearse a lie, and I've interviewed a number of killers who have rehearsed lies, but there's often telltale signals. It could be micro-expressions, distress signals, hand-to-face gestures, changes in paralinguistic delivery and style, but there are usually quite valuable telltale signs.
Very quickly, to what extent do people practice lies, good lies? Bill Clinton being an example, use semantics. In other words, it's not that they lie explicitly, they rely on semantics. I didn't have sexual relations with that woman, by which we presume he meant intercourse, but he was having other forms of sexual relations with her. How common is that?
That's very common. Typically, we lie by being evasive, omissive or dismissive. So often, people don't even answer the question. Now, if I was to polygraph test Bill Clinton as to whether or not he had a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky, he would probably pass that test because he's rationalised to himself, well, technically, she performed a sexual act on me and I wasn't involved in a relationship. So he can rationalise. And I think a while ago he was asked if he'd ever used an illegal drug, and his response was, I've never violated a law of my country. Now, that sounds like a specific denial, but he hasn't in fact answered the question. Later on, he admitted that he smoked marijuana at Oxford University but didn't inhale. So people will tell you what they want you to know.
Stephen Apra, Managing Director of Australian Polygraph Services. Thanks very much indeed for your time, Steve. Nice to talk to you. We appreciate it. Steve's website is polygraph.com.au. After the break, King Kong. We talk to the man in the hairy mask. In the meantime, ponder this.